Hi, my name is John Snow. We're about to overhaul and rebuild a 350 cubic inch GM engine, which is also known as the Smallblock, or a 5.7 litre V8 made by General Motors, GM. This particular one is from a Mercruiser, but Volvo Penta also name badged as well, but they all originally are GM engines. This one will have new pistons, new cylinder heads. They're going to have a higher compression cylinder head, which are Vortec cylinder heads, which are basically a better air movement through it, and it's a carburetor model, it's not a fuel injected model. And the rated horsepower for Mercruiser give it 250, which is pretty well guaranteed. Depending on how much the camshafts lift and open the valves is depending on how much horsepower you get and how you time the engine on the valve timing. I'm going to try and keep everything pretty well standard to try and keep the reliability. I'm not looking for drag racing in this engine. I'm looking for something that'll constantly work well in a boat for many years. So I'm only going to be looking at somewhere around about probably 280 to 320 odd horsepower, somewhere around about that region. That will automatically become that sort of horsepower because of the Summit Racing cylinder heads, which are slightly higher compression cylinder heads that are a vortex type and much more efficient and allow the fuel to burn better. So that's the reasoning for that. But we're on to reliability, so let's get on to the job and show you how the engine's overhauled and what needs to be done. So here's the GM block, basically stripped down already and cleaned up, and most of the dirt and rust is out of it. So just to be sure, what I'd done was these cylinders have already been honed out, and they get honed out with a honing tool like this that goes on the end of a drill, big drill, and you do it from the other side. This block is upside down at the moment, so this spins around like that inside, and it has to be moved in and out at the same time so that it allows the correct scratches or grooves to be made in the cylinder at the same time as cleaning it, and that way it holds oil for better cooling and better compression. They're not expensive tools, but they're pretty well essential. Before you smash through the core plugs, these core plugs, by the way, on GM are all made out of brass, so I would recommend that you measure up the new core plugs that you have before taking them out. They're not essential to take out because they're made of brass, and these are original, and I can't see any failure with them. But what it does do is it allows you to open up, check for rust, and then put compressed air through any of the holes, so that you can put compressed air through, sandblast it, acid wash it, whatever, because generally these are seawater cooled and you get scale buildup. So that's the first thing you need to do, is make sure everything is clean before you start, and make sure you've got the right plugs before you start breaking out the old one. So to give you an idea, once the core plugs have been out, you look inside the cylinders and you will see that there is quite a bit of like scale and dirt in there, which I'll be able to get to now with a pressure washer, and be able to clean out a lot better inside of there. This one here on the in the middle, that's oil on the other side of that, because that's from the camshaft that goes through the middle. So that one doesn't actually need to be changed unless it's leaking for some reason. Well, let's get the pressure washer right up inside of all these little holes. Right, inside of here I've put a mixture of phosphoric acid, about 10%, and about 90% water basically, And phosphoric acid is basically what you find in Coca-Cola. I don't recommend putting Coca-Cola in there, but it's a rust inhibitor. It basically converts rust, or rust converter. In the US also known as OSFO. And I'm basically just going to spray that inside the water jacket just to try and retard any rusting that will take place in the future. So I just squirt that in there, and it's not a strong mixture like I said, but it does just help prevent the rust. And I'll get on and do all inside of all the water jackets and anywhere I think that rust could be. When I'm finished, I just blow dry it with a compressed air. I don't bother to wash it off with any more water. I want a little bit of that acid to stay on the metal part so that it doesn't rust. That's what rust converter is all about. So I just blow dry it, that's fine. Might be worth to note that I actually oil the cylinders before I've done any of this process, so that I don't get rust and things starting on the cylinders, and then I'll clean those out and dry those out and re-oil them very shortly. Right, I've just given it a quick clean off with gasoline and about a 50-to-1 oil in it, like you would use for an outboard motor or something. And that basically just cleans off any bits of debris and makes sure that the cylinders stay protected until I get it into the workshop and give it a good clean up. But there we go, nice and clean. Now ready start to assemble basically. So now's assembly time. Right, just so you get some idea of inside where the cylinders are. This is basically the cylinder that's been de-rusted in that. So obviously that's all been chipped as best as possible. It's had an acid wash. It's also had a light oil spray over it. It's probably about the best protection it's going to get, and that should certainly help the life of the motor. This is quite a few years old, this engine, and it's still in very good condition. When you're putting your core plugs back in, you can put them in dry, you can put a bit of Loctite on there or some other type of Indian head sealer or something like that. I generally use a little thin film of silicone, so that if there's any slight scratch or anything around the inside the surface, it won't allow any water to leak out. And then I take the big socket, knock it on there and carefully knock it down until the edges are flush, and that's the same with all 8 of them. So that's how the plugs go in, just slightly short of going all the way in there. So that's spot on, and you can see a little bit of white silicone around the edges, which ensures that the thing's not going to leak. So as you can see, the new core plugs are in now. It's looking a lot better. Well, I bought all my parts from Summit Racing Equipment. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that, or I don't say they're the only people, but I import from the United States because I'm actually in Spain at the moment, and I've done so for about the last 10 years, and I've always had good results. You buy your parts wherever you want, but I've always had good quality, good price, good after sales service, good everything, so that's why I deal with them. Supplied in the overhaul kit is camshaft bearings. However, we've already got very good condition camshaft bearings with no play at all, so it certainly doesn't warrant me having to change them if there's nothing wrong with them. It's a process that in case you've got something bad there, at least you can do that. Here's the new crankshaft bearing shells. They sit into these places here. What I do is take a little bit of oil and 1200 paper, and I'll make sure there's no rust in any of these areas here, and then clean it all off nicely in compressed air before I put them into place, to make sure that there's absolute perfect fit, and there's no dirt behind there that can create a tight bearing or anything. After the bearings have been put in dry, and you push them down in with your fingers, there's no tools, definitely they don't hit it with anything. Then you basically place the crankshaft in there, and it's time to measure up the oil clearance. Just before I put the crankshaft in, I give it a little bit of a polish up with a bit of paraffin or turpentine and 1200 paper, and then make sure that everything is perfectly clean and all the oil holes are all blown out before you place it into the engine to measure up the oil. crankshaft is in place on the bearings, I just push it down and give it a little bit of a twist back and forth just to make sure that it's nicely seated down and there's nothing in there. This is green plaster gauge. It's ideal for measuring the oil clearance on bearings. So what you do is you take a pair of scissors, you cut a little piece off, okay, you turn that around, and then inside of that you have a little tiny thin piece of plastic. That little piece of plastic you take out and you put on the bearing. It's like a little hair. I'll show you now. There the plaster gauge hair is sitting on the bearing, and now here's the new bearing, everything dry, there's no oil anywhere here. I then place that down on the top of that and I tighten it down so that it'll squeeze that little hair, and that will then tell me the actual oil clearance. Torque down the bearing evenly, both sides, so that it's to the normal tightness, and then you remove it again to see what the plastic gauge has been squashed out to. The plastic gauge, all I do is I just scrape it off with my nail. It comes off very easily, as you can see. It's nice and clean, so that's not a problem. So after you've done the measurement, you can see it leaves a mark on the crankshaft, so you can see each one of those has a mark. There we go, and then that gets measured up with a piece of paper on the bearings, because you've got the same pattern on the bearings, and that's anywhere between 0.002 and 0.0015, and they're all about the same. I've just checked them, and that is the flywheel side of the crank, which basically takes all of the vibration and force, so everything is good there. Measuring the oil clearance on all the main bearings is 0.051 of a millimeter, and that is good. If we turn that over, we can get that into inches or into thou, which is about 2 thou, 0.002 of an inch. Right, so after the measuring the oil clearance is done, then I put a little bit of grease on all the bearings, and I'm ready to place the crankshaft down there now before tightening up for the final time. So now, before we put the crank in, we've greased up the bearings on the camshaft as well, and we place the camshaft in very carefully. I'll need 2 hands for that, so I'll stop. A little oil and grease on every crank journal as you put it back together, and then I tighten them preliminary one by one and just give the crank a little bit of a turn just to make sure you haven't got anything jamming up. I mean, these two are already tight, so I know they're fine. Now I'm going to do this one. So the crankshaft is all in, all torqued down nice and tight, and it turns very, very easily. That's how it should be turning, nice and easily. And the camshaft is in, and the retainer plate's in place.